Well, this is, I think, really special. It's probably one of Andrew's probably first public appearances since stepping down as CEO of all of Sony PlayStation, Sony Interactive Entertainment. No company's had more names. I think it's safe to say than Sony Active Entertainment. You know, he was also Sony's CMO for the whole company, which had to be fascinating since PlayStation is so different than so much of the rest of Sony. He's advising a bunch of companies now, still living a peripatetic lifestyle dedicated to at least the front of the plane most of the time. So I'm really interested, when I knew that we were going to do this talk, I looked a little bit, obviously, more into your background. You made a decision to go to Sony like super early in your life, like soon after college, right?
I actually made an earlier decision. I went to Japan in '88 on something called the JET program. I taught English in high schools for 2 years before joining Sony. And so it was 2 years teaching, and then it was time to sort of get a proper career-paying job. No diss on English language teaching in Japan, but that wasn't what I was going to do. And so yeah, I joined Sony in 1990 in corporate communications.
And at that time, even an old man like me, I'm not sure I can even remember, what was the first year of the PlayStation?
Well, first year of the PlayStation officially was 93, 94, but for me it was 91 when I was sat in a conference room at 11 o'clock at night in the PR department, and a gentleman called Ken Kutaragi rang up raging about what had happened with Philips and an announcement that had just gone down. And that really was sort of my first touch point with PlayStation. And then, in the weird way that you get involved with projects in Japan, things would come along in the PR department and you would literally volunteer for them. And this thing came along, which is a super secret project called PSX. And I had spent a lot of my misspent youth in game arcades in the west of England playing Defender and Galaxian. And I said, sure, I'll volunteer for that. I'll go do that.
At arcades?
At arcades, yeah. Well, my parents thought I was at band practice.
You didn't have to have a note from the teacher.
No,
huh?
no, I was okay.
You know, as you know, we've done a bunch of research over the years for Sony PlayStation, and I always found it interesting how in the early years of PS3, people say, I didn't buy a PS3 because I loved my PS2. It's like my favorite thing in the world. I mean, like you would love a wife or a child or something. Do you actually have a favorite console for the 4 consoles?
Oh boy. Well, no surprises that I like the even numbers. One of the odd numbers there when we were, what was it, losing $2.8 billion in the first year of launch was not so memorable. 2 was, I think, fantastic because for me at least, I remember launch really, really clearly and feeling for the first time that thanks to PlayStation in great degree, but then following year, thanks, I think, to Grand Theft Auto, that games were being part of a cultural shift. That we were actually seeing a sort of maturity emerging in the market for the first time, and the medium being taken seriously, and just a cultural shift that I think was very special. 4, for me, is equally special, but I think to understand how joyful an experience it was for us on the Sony side, you had to look back and see what the context was that we did at launch. I mean, in 2013, the vast majority of conventional wisdom, probably including Dean Takahashi, was saying that consoles were dead, and that the whole market was moving to mobile, and that there was no future for this. And we had come off the back of Vita, which had quite frankly struggled in markets outside of Asia. And so I remember, saying to myself and some version using a very English metaphor of, am I going to be the last governor of Hong Kong? And this is going to be the sort of foreseeing the end of the console life cycle. Unfortunately, those, impending doom mongers were all very wrong. And I think when we talk a little bit about the future of consoles, I'll talk a little bit about why I think they were wrong and why there are some very strong reasons to bet very heavily on console.
Boy, people have been wrong a lot in this industry lately with the death of PC and the death of console.
Yep.
And both are as strong as ever, be safe to say. All right, so let's talk about console. Presumably, but I somewhat snarkily wrote down here, will there be an Xbox 2? You know, naming, at least you guys have easy naming.
Probably won't be called an Xbox 2, will it?
Probably won't be. But you guys, of course, are, you know, there's no way you wouldn't call yours the 5. I mean, you've locked yourself into it.
I am no longer in a position to comment on those matters.
But let's just assume, or let me put it to you this way. If there is going to be a 5 and if there is going to be a 2, they're already way down the road, right? I mean, there's laboratories set up and people working at, you know, any company that's going to be releasing a console. When the next cycle would be what, would you say for now?
Well,
3, 4 years?
I'm not going to get into specifics on the life cycles. But generally, I think I am very bullish about further life cycles for consoles, and I'll give you 3 or 4 reasons why. One is that in contrast to mobile, which we've been hearing a lot about today, and the idea of where's the next billion gamers coming from, for console, we are still so underrepresented and underpenetrated in so many markets around the globe, and that's partly why this current life cycle has done extremely well. You've seen very strong, vibrant markets in the Western world, but you've seen places like the Middle East take off and suddenly become a real gaming hub. I think there's almost a generational shift when games achieve this point of cultural relevance and maturity, and that takes a while to, even in places like Germany, which was heavily PC dominant, has now made that shift. So if you think about just how much potential there is there still in markets around the world, let's not forget that China still is largely I wouldn't say consoles are persona non grata there, but it's still a very sort of tough regimen with which to engage. I'm hopeful that will change. The second reason is around continued technological advance. I think you're seeing, whereas it looked like people were going to hit a wall, certain processing technologies, FinFET among them, are leading us to believe that there is going to be another leap, another sort of ability to raise up the whole experience from a technological standpoint. The third aspect, I would say, and it's more of a personal opinion, is I think that we're only just scratching the surface of what data can be and how data can inform a console gaming experience. And because you've got bespoke systems, you've got such an interesting opportunity to leverage data. And hopefully, given the current climate and what's going on right now, in a safe and manageable way for our players and for our consumers. And so those would be the sort of 3 big reasons why I would say that consoles have an extremely bright future.
And a really good price. I mean, yeah. Look at what an Alienware costs you.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I know, because I have to buy them for my team.
And by no means, and I have spent probably 2 decades arguing that the console versus PC is just a fallacy, right? I mean, I think that there are so many of our players out there who will play what they want, where they want it, on the device that suits them. And I also think that that's something that we've seen PlayStation 4 do very well, and I hope bodes well for the future, is that PC clearly pioneered many trends. Streaming of one's play, game sharing, those kinds of things happen on the PC first. But it really is helpful when the console can take those then and adapt them and bring them out to a very sort of safe, thank you, Mike Fisher, and sort of very family-friendly way, and take it out to the mass market. And I think that's very healthy for the industry overall.
Medium short term, we're still going to see a disc though, correct? It'll be both. They'll be both stream, download, and discs for a while.
My guess would be, and I don't have any firm knowledge on this, is that you will see disc be around in the industry for a while, because if you're going to tap into some of these markets, then I think allowing that more traditional physical purchase model and having that as an option is probably no bad thing.
Like single player is the dominant mode for the small number of consoles that are in China, right? Because they're not connected.
Well, they are connected. It's just that they are connected in a sort of walled garden within a walled garden. So the access, for example, to the store is to a Chinese store rather than any of the other stores that are around there, which allows you only access to the content that has been officially approved and passed through the censorship regime. So that's the scenario that you have right now.
Okay, so as we talk about the future console, I think there's a couple of things we ought to touch on. One is obviously free to play, largely created in Korea and China around the PC and the Bong and so on and so forth. How do you see that playing out in the console world, which has obviously traditionally been a buy the machine, buy the disc ecosystem?
You know, it's an interesting question because quite honestly, it's the subject of much debate, I think, within the console industry. And I think you've got a school of thought that is, dare I say it, very conservative, that thinks it's cannibalization, that it's going to somehow damage the market. And then you've got a school of thought that says that that's just not true. I am very much in the latter camp. I'm very bullish and pro the idea of free-to-play on console. And for one reason, I think it's just anything that offers the consumer or the player greater flexibility in the way that they can acquire or interact with content and a different payment mechanism is welcome. I don't think that it's a zero-sum game. Again, I think it underestimates the player if they're not smart enough to know different models for different games and to pick and choose and what really motivates them. And also, if you can open up, as we heard, you know, I think quite eloquently this morning, via the adoption of free-to-play, to another whole trove of creative talent that otherwise is not going to find its way very easily to console, then I think that's obviously a positive for the industry overall. You know, it's kind of not something I would have said, I think, very loudly in my previous role, but I do think personally that there is a slight concern, if I have a slight concern around consoles and consoles' health, it's the potential over-dominance of sort of a small number of very, very powerful franchises that just sort of sweep up a lot of the consumer's time, a lot of the player's time, and sweep up a lot of the consumer investment. So free-to-play for me is an opportunity perhaps to create a counterweight to that bodes well for something of a healthier ecosystem.
And most of the true free-to-play games are not as heavy DLC provided for as Madden and FIFA and so on and so forth, and this is obviously what you're referring to.
Absolutely. It is a different and equally interesting and viable model.
Do you have any observations about the recent, I think it was a relatively, I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this, relatively mild contretemps over the EA nature of some of the DLC. They've actually, I think, been pretty conservative and careful, and I know that's been important to Andrew. I mean, do you see this as an ongoing problem in the industry, overcharging consumers, or the perception that we're selling the ability to win on the console, or?
Well, I mean, you know, what you're describing there, Mike, is almost kind of the inevitable flip side of what I was just describing. So if console and the console business and console publishers are going to understand how to adapt their monetization models, then there's going to be a learning curve. You know, there's going to be some learning that happens along that way, and there's probably going to be, as we've seen, a few missteps. I think that it comes down to if you can retain, as I think EA did, a strong and honest communication with your players, and fundamentally demonstrate that you are committed to trust, then you can overcome that and get beyond it.
And I mean, when you're playing these numbers of hours with a machine that you love, there is a lot of trust there.
Absolutely.
I don't doubt that
Absolutely.
at all. And I think it'll be interesting to see whether, you know, some of these DLC revenues are starting to approach, you know, 500, 600 million, I'm told, for a couple of titles. It's obvious which ones.
Yep.
You know, at $1 billion, it's possible that they might decide that even the biggest titles should be free to play.
Yeah, no, I think you're seeing, oddly, sort of some conservatism, I think partly in part because of labeling around free to play. But exactly to your point, if you look at some of those very powerful franchises that have, kind of turned on a dime a little bit and adapted their payment model, they've thrived. They've done really, really well off of that experience, and we know who those usual suspects are.
Okay, so in talking about the future of console, obviously you guys at Sony threw in on VR in a big way. It's worked out pretty damn well for you so far. I mean, only you and Samsung are really at the front of the pack anymore, and it was other guys at the front of the pack not too long ago. You must have been right in the middle of all those decisions. Take us a little bit through the Sony commitment to VR and a little bit on your personal opinion about the future of VR.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked a lot about how skeptical I was around VR initially, and it took that sort of light bulb moment demo that I think many people have experienced.
It wasn't the shooting game from the London studio, was it?
It absolutely was, and it was the point of when I'd actually tried to put down the controller on the desk that wasn't there, and that was the moment for me where it was like, oh shit, this could be really big. I think this was touched on by a couple of speakers yesterday, and I want to endorse their view that it's a shame to me that the hype machine got going just as powerfully as it did. And boy, we did our best, I certainly did, to try and manage those expectations and kind of set a sense of timeline for this technology that we are at very, very early stages. I would have two observations on VR. I think that first of all, I would say I think there is at least one or two more, full hardware cycle iterations before you're going to get to answering the core challenges that you have right now. And it was pointed out yesterday that location-based VR is doing well. Why? Because it's a short roller coaster, theme park-like experience, and that works really well for people. And there's a wow factor, and it's great. What has posed a challenge to the industry is repeat play mechanics. And also, how do you have something that can sustain longer play periods over time? Those challenges. But if I look at those challenges, there is already, in my mind at least, a basket of technologies that are out there that can really, when put together, could help address those issues. So in that sense, on a long-term basis, I'm still very positive.
Yeah, I had that experience in running through the Void Star Wars, which is now out for the public in Anaheim, and they're charging, I believe, $30. And
wow.
The big question when I got done, I was sweating, fat guy, and I'm like, how long was I playing? And they're like 13 minutes, and I go, it was so cool. I thought it was great. It looks like a buoyancy control vest that you're wearing, like a scuba diver, and it heats up, and it has prick points that jab you a little bit. I mean, really, I thought super real. I felt it was worth $30. I don't know how well it's doing, but Bushnell's got Nolan's got a.
Well, and guys were saying yesterday that that most of these experiences are selling out, and when they're laying in more opportunities, those sell out again. So I think that the fundamental experience itself can be magical. It's a question of what ergonomics, design, latency, all of these other factors that need to be addressed so that that's more of a sustainable and mass market experience.
Did you guys strategically believe this would be a real differentiator for you with the 4? What was the big motivation in doing it? Obviously, Microsoft had not jumped into VR.
Yeah. The motivation really was that we felt that we had such a strong console base on which to embark on this endeavor. That was point number one. I think point number two was, we had just had a lot of people in what I would say is a very PlayStation style, sort of in pockets around the organization who'd been tinkering with VR for an awfully long time. And it just took some management will and some sort of coordinated centralized R&D effort to really start to pull this together and say, yeah, we're going to actually do this, we're going to make a product out of it. And I think, let's be very honest here, I think we'd also seen in the intervening time as all of this was going on, we'd seen the rise of Oculus Rift, and we'd seen that there seemed to be a substantial developer interest in this new medium, and that deserved some attention.
Well, the little bit of time that we have left, unfortunately, we're not going to have time to talk about esports, but because I really want to make sure we talk a little bit and we get your future vision on game streaming game streaming as a download, game streaming as a visual sharing. the whole cloud and its role in games as a service. Do you see this as being super important in the future, and any point of view about where this should be headed?
I do think it is important. I think that if you look back over particularly console gaming history, that there are certain inflection points that allow for the industry to be upended and for new participants to emerge. And one of those is when you have a wholesale shift in the distribution method. Because in content-based industries, that really is what's creating barriers to entry for people to come in. So I think that there is no reason why streaming shouldn't be just as present, other than technical challenges in games, in the same way that we've seen it dramatically change the music industry, we've seen it dramatically change the film and television content industry. I think it is perfectly possible for that to come to games as well. And the evidence I draw on was the original launch of PlayStation. Because what that was based on really was not just 3D graphics. It was saying, and the vision was to say, if we shift from mask ROM cartridges, which take 3 months to make and put on a ship, and go to these little discs that we can make just like that, then there's an opportunity to lower all of the cost barriers, to therefore allow developers to take more risks than they ever had before, and to allow for innovation in the industry. So I think if it's managed well, streaming could be another one of those inflection points that potentially allows for other non-category players to take part. I think the only thing that needs to happen is that the business model has to be well thought through so that publishers and developers are seen to benefit in the same way that they have done with models that have sustained them to this point.
All right, well, save up your money. You've got the PS5 coming out sometime in the future. And I thought it was great to see you, and we really appreciate you coming and spending an hour or two with us.
Great.
Thanks a lot, Andy.
Much, Mike. Thank you.